I'm sure.
We want to thank everyone for coming tonight. What better thing there is to do than to be here instead of home watching Monday Night Football? A couple questions, one on funding that was answered at the end of last time. I'll cover in more detail tonight. The other one was on the tutoring program for the students who are getting it here because we did not make AYP. There are no providers in this area, and you have to be a recognized provider by the Office of Public Instruction as mandated by the federal government in order to tutor. It has to be after school, cannot be done during school. So that's why the youngsters here that have elected to go through the tutoring program are going online with Sylvan in Missoula. So that was a question somebody wanted me to cover a little bit more detail from last week. So we are having 4 presentations under Phase 1. Phase 1, hopefully, when we get to next March, April, and we really know where our budgets will be for next year, and we have to realize how much we will have to cut. These 4 presentations will give everyone a better idea of the background. Because a lot of times the questions and answers are there because they don't really understand how our hands are tied before we can spend money. So the whole purpose of these four presentations is to make everybody more consciously aware of what you can and cannot do about school funding. So we will have 2 more after this week. Tonight we'll review a little bit, and like I said last week, the only comments, one was on school funding, which will come up here. We had another one on tutoring, some other ones I answered in emails. We'll then cover the relationship, because this is important, between the Montana Department of Education, the Office of Public Instruction, normally OPI, and the legislative body in terms of school policies, accreditation standards, rules and regulations, and funding. What powers do all of them have, and do they support each other? Do they complement each other? So we will cover that. And OPI is Office of Public Instruction. The general fund. After tonight, hopefully you'll understand a little about where it comes from, who pays the bills, what is not funded within the general budget. In other words, when we pick up, we can see things around campus. Is that general fund money, or is that grant money? Is that transportation money? Where does that come from? Have a better idea of our salaries and benefits, which you have a slide in there on exact percentage breakdown within our general budget of that. Health insurance, and then our general fund reserve, which is maxed at 10%, which I said in the old days used to be 30%. And that was changed by the legislative body. Now, the Montana Constitution is where everything comes from. And they basically state that the Board of Public Education has the power to direct and control schools in the state of Montana. The legislative challenged this a few years back. It went to federal court in Helena, at which they ruled and stated no, the legislature has no control over governing schools in Montana. It could have been appealed to the Supreme Court in Montana, but so far that option has not been carried out. So they did rule where the Board of Public Ed has it. They govern everything on the Board of Public Ed. 7 people sit on the Board of Public Ed, of which they are all appointed by the governor. So the governor has control. Anyone wants to sit on the Board of Public Ed when there is a vacancy, there's representation from administration, principals, school boards, etc. in the state. If you want to serve on the Board of Public Ed, which controls the entire structure that we operate under, you have to have a recommendation by the governor. The Office of Public Instruction basically sits in the middle. They provide recommendations to the Board of Public Ed, and at the same time monitor us in the field. Their responsibility is to make sure that we have certified teachers, that we're carrying out the curriculum as outlined and passed under the Board of Public Ed guidelines. They're the monitor, as well as they are the ones who make recommendations to the Board of Public Education. Now, over the years, and I don't know if this is the same in other states, but in Montana right now, approximately at least 80% of all the funds that go into the Office of Public Instruction comes from the federal government. Now you can look at it and say, well, it's not our tax dollar, but on the other hand, who do they answer to? So most of their time and emphasis is going to be where the money comes from, which is enforcing federal policies. So that's the Office of Public Instruction. The legislature has tossed on them. They are the ones who develop the school funding formulas. They're the one who dictate how we are funded, how much we get for all the entitlements, as you'll see up here, whether it be student entitlements, by school entitlements, quality educator amounts, at risk. All that is passed by the legislature. So you have a Board of Public Ed that sets the guidelines and the rules, and they don't have to worry about how it's funded. You got the Office of Public Instruction that has to enforce it, but they have no control of the money that helps us operate our schools. Then you have the legislative body that has to meet every other year and come up with how they're going to award the funds to us. So you got three distinct bodies that initially, when you think in checks and balances, isn't a bad system. But then if you get into where you become hostile towards each other, then it's very difficult to get things done. So that's how our current three main players operate and the different unique functions of each one of them. And of course, the general fund is the main fund. You know, that's what most of us in the field really worry about, because that's the one to dictate, you know, our teachers, our teaching supplies, our activities, heat the buildings. If you build a building, that's usually out of a bond and out of a whole separate fund. But the general fund, when you hear about that, is the main body that we operate. And in here is where it gets complex. Because to fund the general fund budget elements, you have basic entitlements. That's by schools. And remember, I hit that a little bit last time, that if you're in Missoula and have 3 high schools, and you're in Thompson Falls and have 1 high school, we both get the same amount, 260-some thousand, I believe, somewhere in there. That's the basic entitlements. Junior high gets a separate amount, and the elementary gets a separate amount, one-time funding. So that's your basic. Then you have your per student entitlement. That's the big one. That's the one that really hits us, because it doesn't make any difference how many students we have in a high school, we still get our basic high school entitlement. It's not going to go down. Might stay the same when they freeze it, but it's not going to vary much. Even if they cut it a couple percent, it's only going to go down a couple $1,000s from the 260. So our enrollment doesn't determine so much a basic entitlement, but what does is a per student entitlement. And that's not by classes, it's by students. So when you lose enrollment, like we're losing enrollment, that's 5,500 to 6,500 every time a kid decreases the next year. That's under the basic entitlement. State special education payment, that is given to a school, not based on the number of kids that you service. It's based on your enrollment. Local special education match, we have to match. And then since we're part of a co-op, we basically give that up to the co-op, because there are advantages of being part of the co-op, as well as Knoxon, Trout Creek, Hot Springs, and St. Regis all belong to the Sanders County Cooperative for Special Education. And we'll get into the special ed more in January. The next one, the quality educator payment, is a big one, because you're reading about it right now in the news. And we'll cover that a little later in the presentation. That is the one that the governor, in his recommended budget, has tied into taking the oil and gas taxes from basically 4 wealthy oil-producing counties. Right now, that revenue goes to those counties and those school districts. He wants to take, and his recommendation is, the quality educator is right around $3,100 a teacher. So for every educator is prorated in the district, I think we're at right around 43 times 3,000, about $120,000 we get on the quality educators. He is funding that under the new budget, under taking the tax revenues from those 4 counties, distributing them equally among the state. If the legislature does not accept that, taking those oil and gas revenues from those counties, where do we come up with the money? That's another $120,000 we could lose out of our high school and elementary districts. So that quality educator was put in there to, it doesn't go to teachers. When I was first put in the legislature a couple sessions ago, initially it was go to give teachers raises. But then it was a little higher under the recommendations. They diluted it down, and now it just goes into your general budget. It has nothing to do with teacher raises, has nothing to do with teachers. It just goes into your general budget. It could go for the lights, it could go for your utilities, books, whatever on the quality educator amount, but it just works into your overall budget. Your at-risk student payment, we did not get this last session. That was also passed in 2007. Based on your Title I funds, they awarded school districts a set amount. It's not a lot of money. Ours is about $20,000 total, $10,000 for each campus, but we did not get this for these last 2 years. They put that to zero. They only gave it in there for a couple of years. It is in the governor's proposal on the at-risk amount, so that could be an additional $20,000, at least, I believe, in our district, because of our high number of students on free reduced hot lunch. So that one has not been in our last two general budgets, could be in our next one if the governor's budget goes through. The Indian education for all payment, that's based on strictly student enrollment. It's not a lot of money, 8,000 maybe a year, 7,000. And then you get the American Indian Achievement Gap payment. That's based strictly on the number of Native Americans that attend our school district, as we report in our fall report that NAIA does and gathers on a district. I think we've averaged right around 20 to 30 Native Americans in our district. And you get a set amount for each one of those Native Americans that goes into your budget, and that may be another $4,000 or $5,000 that comes in to your budget as well under that. They put that under that